talk about HSPs and specifically how to navigate being an HSP. And in our case, navigating how to be 3 HSPs living in one household. What does it mean to be an HSP? He made a really cool video about how being an HSP can feel like, but what does it really mean? I definitely work from a non-pathologizing approach, but being an HSP is a biological evolutionary adaptation for survival of our species. What that means is that it is a trait that essentially helped our species survive through this adaptation, and it is not unique to humans. It is in 15 to 20% of all species. And it's a trait that was studied, founded and studied originally 30 years ago by a psychiatrist, Elaine Aron, but has been studied a lot since. And HSPs it's a really overlooked and very underspoken about trait in human beings. So being an HSP means a few core things. One, that you have a deeper core processing and a highly attuned nervous system. That means as you're processing information, your core of processing cognitively is deeper, which leads to people that actually really think about things, really think about the risk. So HSPs are typically highly risk averse. And when studied in small children, they found that kids that were HSPs would watch all the other kids on the playground and figure out how every single thing works before they even engage in playing. And
that was me.
Yes, exactly. And me too. I would never just jump off something. My sister would just jump off the roof of the house. I'd watch her do it 100 times, and then I actually would grab onto the roof and lower myself and feel what the impact of like 4 feet was before I got to that 8 foot. So HSPs are risk averse, but also like the deep core of processing, which is what I'm breaking down right now, means that HSPs are really thinking a lot deeper, and their brains are working a lot harder, and they're analyzing things to a larger, greater capacity than the average human being, which is why HSPs are not neurotypical. They're neurodiverse. And so the neurodiversity of HSPs sometimes leads to them being falsely misdiagnosed as autistic, especially because the next trait I want to discuss is overstimulation and hypersensitivity. So the nervous system, because of the deep core of processing, processes information in the nervous system a lot deeper. So those are those animal instincts of feeling and sensing the natural world around us higher. So sounds, lights, groups of people can be excessively overwhelming to an HSP, similar to somebody that has autism. And so there are a lot of kids that are misdiagnosed as autistic, and really they're just highly sensitive children.
Right. I think about myself as a highly sensitive child and some of the things you were talking about, having to watch everything and analyze it before I would ever make the move to do something. I've been that way with everything, not just as a kid with jumping off the roof and taking a slide or something. I remember as a kid going to the water park, there was the cliffhanger water slide in Sacramento that...
Oh, that's so funny. I was just thinking about amusement parks when you brought that up, babe.
That water slide was such an extreme sensation, dropping straight down.
Yes.
That I had to stand there and watch other people do it over and over and over and over before I ever got the guts to do it myself.
Totally. And you're taking a risk assessment when you're doing that.
Yeah.
And that's a biological adaptation, because HSPs are why we still are here today, because non-HSPs are the people that jump on motorcycles and just do something and die doing it.
Yeah.
God, how did we pick a muddy trail? Again.
No mud here.
Oh good, we're getting to the sun again. Yeah, it's funny that you were talking about amusement parks, because I was thinking about how HSPs need a lot of reassurance and a sense of autonomy, because a lot of other kids and a lot of other people are willing to do things that HSPs aren't, for a variety of reasons, but one being that literally When an HSP goes on a water slide like that, they are actually feeling it far more than a person with a nervous system and a brain that is neurotypical. So quite literally, it is the dial tuned up in the nervous system. So imagine the impacts of feeling things far deeper, thinking about them far greater, analyzing every single decision, and then being forced into something. So HSPs actually attain a lot more psychological and emotional traumas than non-HSPs, especially with parents that have no understanding of their child. And so HSPs are often, as children, called moody, reactive, because things literally affect us more, so we're reacting more, flipping out, and careful, or maybe scaredy cats, sissy warriors,
pussy.
Yeah, and so that's a good one, especially in boys.
Yeah.
So boys that are HSPs get another level of societal trauma stacked on top of them because of the lack of acceptance of boys and men's emotions in general, but then a hypersensitivity. HSPs are far more likely to end up as addicts because of this. And Alanis Morissette is a very outspoken HSP who considers herself somebody that loves sensations. So because we feel everything deeper, our nervous system is actually dialed up. We love the experiences the world offers. So you might notice an HSP child very slow, very methodical, looking at things. They're not children that like to be rushed. And so, yeah, Alanis Morissette is a very outspoken HSP and somebody that fell very heavily into addiction to cope with the traumas and the lifestyle of having to push herself so hard, being so misunderstood. But that actually made her one of the greatest artists of all time.
Being immersed in that industry that she's in.
Yeah, oh boy, we know about that now.
Yeah.
Very lightly.
So much expectation and pressure, which when you're an HSP and already feel things so highly.
Deeply.
Yeah.
So overstimulation. From overstimulation, this is where I want to talk about if you're overstimulated as an HSP, what can you do? Well, we're learning more and more because HSPs are so overstimulated by their environments and because their nervous system has a deeper core processing, they're more likely to get sick faster, get autoimmune diseases, nervous system disorders, anxiety attacks, and all of these are pathologies that are really, what I'm trying to say is a human being that is misunderstood and forced to live outside their authentic self so they cope with addictions or panic attacks or whatever sort of pathology arises. It's not really a pathology, it's just really a wise adaptation to being in a world that does not accommodate for HSPs at all. You hold her for a sec, she's overstimulating me. So ways to mitigate overstimulation. Raising a highly sensitive child has been really fascinating as a highly sensitive person myself, because yelling or screaming or her getting reactive can cause my nervous system to get into such a fight or flight so quickly that it's almost impossible for me to bring myself down to be present with her emotions. And so really learning how to adapt and be in a co-regulatory response has been really useful. So overstimulation, how do we get rid of the stimulating parts of our environment? The happiest times I have ever been as an HSP with the lowest anxiety is when I had the least amount of things. So overstimulation, so some of the happiest I've ever been is owning very few things and living in a very simple lifestyle. So recently we just simplified our entire lives by moving from a 3,800 square foot house with a 2-foot garage and a shit ton of stuff to a 700 square foot.
I feel like that's where so much of the trauma comes from, is in having to suppress or not being aware of our own high sensitivity as kids in this world that doesn't support it and expects you to toughen up, be a man.
Yeah, and to like live under society's values, but society values for an HSP is not sustainable. A lot of HSPs actually end up with chronic fatigue and burnout as they try to fit into the normal world, the neurotypical world, and their nervous systems literally cannot handle it, so they fry out. you know, so first you have to have that awareness to know that you are an HSP, and then adapt your lifestyle to fit you instead of you to fit the world. Because if you're an HSP trying to fit yourself into the world, you're going to end up really burnt out, really overstimulated. And it's really a shame because, like as Elaine Aron talks about, HSPs are some of the best you know, employees for businesses and workers and whatnot, but if they're not accommodated for, you know, they're outside the box thinkers. We're not neurotypical.
Yeah.
We're thinking of things deeper and differently, and that's what brings an element to the table that solves a lot of the world's problems. A lot of the biggest problems have been solved by HSPs.
Because HSPs are more in tune and aware of the little things that need to be adjusted, the little things that need to be handled.
And we feel for the world. You know, HSPs are the kids that are, you know, watching, you know, a houseless person on the street and just asking tons of questions and becoming really concerned and trying to figure out how to solve the problem. So not only do HSPs feel these things, but then they feel responsible for fixing the world's problems, because we realize not everybody is thinking about these things. People are living their lives doing these things, and poodle, always be a good poodle. One of the things we are finding that is the most vital part of having a family of HSPs and actually being able to calm our nervous systems down enough to live authentically to ourselves and our purpose is to, one, not live in any conventionality of the world. Owning a home is not for us. It's too much stimulation. Living in a big environment is not for us. Having lots of stuff is not for us. Living simply, living minimally, traveling to see beautiful things, being out in nature, putting our feet on the ground, having lots of downtime to connect, having lots of time to go sit in hot springs. We choose to do stuff like that over going to busy places and going to shopping malls. We don't go to shopping malls as families. We go to the hot springs and we go for hikes in places where we can just like relax.
We as HSPs are so sensitive to changes in our feelings and emotions that we do the things that don't trigger those feelings and emotions. We don't want to feel overstimulated, so we direct our lives in a way that allows us to live according to our sensitivities.
And our true nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, you know, that means we don't watch TV shows, we don't watch movies, we don't watch violent movies. We watch David Attenborough a lot. We watch a lot of nature documentaries. We watch a lot of like spiritual documentaries that are calming.
And if we do find ourselves sitting there watching something and it starts showing an animal eating another animal and it starts to trigger our feelings, we immediately shut it off.
Rather than pushing through. So like we rarely even go to the movie theater anymore because you don't know what's going to pop up. And some people might say, oh, that's weak or that's not being adaptable. But when you recognize that those things are causing many traumas in your body and your mind, and it's literally causing you to carry in your nervous system these traumas that get trapped, you have to complete those emotional cycles. So another thing with HSPs is a lot of those kids are super reactive. And so, you know, something that's really important to know as a parent, if you have an HSP, is it's important to get your kid to do a lot of activity. You know, maybe kickboxing to get that aggression and extra energy out of the system. Maybe dance, or maybe getting rid of your poodle is the solution. She just looked right up at me. The more you simplify your life and the more you honor every single one of those emotions, and you see your sensitivity as a gift to the world, and you use that empathy and that depth of processing and your overstimulation to give back to yourself and others. You know, you might have to heal traumas that make you feel like you have to be producing and have to be pushing yourself. We live in consumer capitalism. We're conditioned to believe that our productivity is our worth. And HSPs just cannot be as productive and it not affect them. I mean, nobody can be as productive as society wants us to be. But especially as a highly sensitive person, it is not attainable or sustainable. It's important to find people that understand you. I mean, look at us having these crazy deep conversations, you know, really intense, sometimes really serious.
You said something about recognizing your sensitivity as a gift, and a gift for helping people in the world or helping the world. I think many HSPs fall into the trap of feeling like a victim to their sensitivity, or feeling like, oh, poor me, that I feel everything like this, when really it's a gift to be able to feel everything. We just tend to let it become overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, or we don't know, so we're like having panic and anxiety attacks. And HSPs are inherently empaths, and everybody's really empathic and psychic and connected, but highly sensitive people can pick up on somebody's nervous system. It's important as an HSP to learn regulation, self-regulation, but even more than that, co-regulation, because two people's nervous systems breathing together and touching, physical touch, is essential for HSP children and adults, really. It's as essential for us as it is for our daughter, actually. Especially when you have pre-verbal traumas and you didn't get that regulation as a kid, and your parents were likely disgusted and overwhelmed perhaps at your sensitivity, which then makes you...
Parents are your primary caregivers that you're growing up with, and they're sitting here telling you that these feelings you have, you just need to stuff that down.
And that's literally your baseline of normalcy. We all think that our childhood experience is normal. We normalize our childhood experiences. That's why it's a trauma. If we didn't normalize it and we knew that it was abnormal, we could have separation, right? Some space from it.
Right.
But because we don't know anything else than that, then we internalize it as being normal. And then what that leads to is an internalized sense of there is something inherently and intrinsically wrong with me, instead of there's something inherently and intrinsically unique about me and a gift.
Leads to those feelings of shame and like I'm a victim to who I am.
And that leads to addiction, because HSPs feel everything so much more. They turn to things like heroin and opioids and cocaine and cannabis to become disembodied. Every single one of the clients I work with as a psychotherapist and coach and healer is almost always an HSP. People hooked into psychiatric medications and that are embedded into the institution and medicalized and put on all these medications so they can push through are almost always HSPs, needing to live their life in a different way, needing to honor the sensitivity of their highly attuned nervous system, being able to have skills to calm down their hyperreactivity, having support and other people that, explain to them that they're not wrong or bad for being born with this evolutionary, adaptable trait.
When you feel things so strongly, then it's easier to be distracted by your feelings and emotions, and then the ADH symptoms are highly exaggerated.
Especially if you're an HSP that has early childhood misattunement, which is what ADHD is rooted in. When you have misattunement, you have a scattered mind. You don't have organization in the mind. You don't have neurofiring and wiring consistently. You have predictability and unpredictability, some predictability, total unpredictability. And what that leads to is a hyper-scanning externally. So some HSPs that had a lot of early childhood misattunement and that scattering and wiring and firing of the neurology actually end up really not being in tune with their bodies and their emotions. Like us, like we didn't even know we were HSPs. We could push through and plow through these situations because we were so disconnected, which led to illness, chronic illness, mental health issues, addiction. We've had all of these things. Both of us have had all of these things. Overeating, trying to ground yourself through eating and drinking because you're denying yourself. So it's really important, like a lot of my HSPs that I work with and my daughter, I really try to get them to sit myself too. Sit and, notice what's happening in the body. Are you hungry? Are you tired? Do you need a hug? What's the sensation? What can you do to resource yourself? Putting your feet on the earth, getting a hug, taking deep breaths, humming, buzzing. Your nervous system regulation is key. And how can you have a regulated nervous system if you live a life that's crazy and busy and high stressed and you have tons of expectations on yourself and others put tons of expectations on you?
That is key. That is so important, and where we've come with all this self-help and understanding of ourselves, learning about ourselves in a way that allows us to know what we need to do to align our lives to be truer to our true selves and what we really need.
Yeah.
And it's not an end of the road thing if you realize I'm an HSP with ADHD, it's all over, the rest of my life is going to be like this.
With
no,
OCD,
it's not.
with complex trauma.
There are ways to help yourself to, and it does take work. It takes recognizing where in your life things are too much for you, where in your life things are affecting you in ways that are negative.
That aren't serving you.
That aren't serving you.
It's letting go of a lot of things and ideas of expectation of society. So getting rid of all of our things, moving to a small house, like this isn't something we could make, $180,000 a year and live this lifestyle, and we just did it for a year, and it fucking blew. It destroyed us.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to turn up the dial quite a bit in order to turn it back down. And like even like tonight, like we love to go out and do things. And so we're talking, we're like, hey, we should go see music, we should do this, we should do that. And then, you know, we're like, you know what? Whenever we're both HSPs after a busy week and we go out for dinner and we try to do these things, we're tired, we're exhausted, we're not present, and our nervous systems are so attuned to each other, she's gonna pick up on my anxiety, it's gonna make her anxious, it's gonna make me start prodding, it's gonna make her pull away, and guess what? Next thing you know it, we're in a fight. And so learning these things and being like what you said earlier, what did you say earlier?
It's such an incredibly powerful tool for someone who is an HSP to be able to recognize that in yourself and say, okay, we want to go out tonight, we want to go out and listen to music and things, but when you really sit with that,
Yeah.
how does that feel in your chest if you put yourself ahead of time in that situation? Is that really going to serve me? Or am I going to be too tired? Is my partnership going to be strained because we're going to be tired and we're going to start saying things back and forth that trigger each other?
Yeah, and your nervous system is picking it up a lot deeper than the average person.
Right, because you're HSP, every little look that your partner makes, what does that mean? You start analyzing it in your mind. Are they upset at me? Did I say something wrong? And you start going over everything you said over the past hour or whatever.
And then you're in a loud restaurant and there's dishes clanging, and then the couple next to you just got engaged and you're remembering when you got engaged, and that makes you overwhelmed. And then they bring your food, it's just a little too cold, and then some cold air is coming, and next thing you know it, you're a fucking mess. You're a mess.
Yeah.
So again, learning to honor yourself, listen to yourself. Like I feel like this is all fenced off up here.
Kind of looks like it.
Yeah, there's somewhere that isn't though, that leads over by the cars.
Down over that way that goes that way. But
See,
look. There we go.
I knew it.
We are finding our car. We almost got lost in Garden of the Gods.
No, they might have had to send a helicopter in to find us. This is so nice, they feel this.
We sit there and watch the news all the time.
Just sit there and stare at the sun instead. If you wanna stare at someone, go stare at the sun. Go sit.